discovered a secret on her family farm. The autumn Mabel Kirsch turned 10, she started spending her afternoons underground. Not literally, not at first. She'd kneel in the dirt behind her family's barn in Preble County, Ohio, and dig, not deep, just a few inches, then sit there for 20 minutes at a time, staring at what she'd uncovered like it was a puzzle only she could see. Her mother called her in for supper more than once and found her still crouched over the same patch of soil, brushing it back into place like she was tucking something in for the night. She wouldn't say what she was looking for. When her older brother Dean asked, she just said, "Something's talking under there." He laughed and told their dad Mabel had gone strange. Their dad, a quiet man named Russ Kirsch, didn't laugh. He just watched his daughter a little longer than usual that evening, the way a man watches weather building on the horizon. Nobody in the family knew it yet, but the thing Mabel had noticed in the dirt behind that barn was about to change how the entire Kirsch farm grew food. If stories about family, patience, and the wisdom hiding in plain sight move you, subscribe and stick with us. Drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Preble County sits in the flat farmland of southwestern Ohio, close enough to the Indiana line that the radio stations blur between states. The Kirsch family had worked the same 60 acres for 3 generations, mostly corn, some hay, and a stubborn 2-acre apple orchard that Russ's grandfather had planted in the 1950s. By the time Mabel came along, that orchard was tired. The trees still bloomed each spring, but the fruit came smaller every year, the leaves paler, the yield dropping so steadily that Russ had quietly started pricing out what it would cost to bulldoze the whole thing and plant soybeans instead. He hadn't told anyone that either. Some things a farmer keeps to himself until he's sure. Mabel's grandmother, Dot, was the one who noticed her granddaughter's habit first. Dot was 79, sharp as a tack, and spent most of her mornings on the back porch with tea and a stack of old Ohio State Extension bulletins she'd saved since the 1970s, back when she and Russ's grandfather ran the orchard together. She read them the way other people read letters from old friends. It was Dot who mentioned almost offhand that the healthiest trees in the orchard weren't the ones getting the most water or the most fertilizer. They were the ones closest to a wild stand of old oaks at the property's edge, trees nobody had planted and nobody managed. Mabel asked why that would matter. Dot didn't have an answer, but Mabel couldn't stop thinking about the question. That was in September. By October, she was digging. Here's what Mabel eventually understood and what the adults around her had spent decades farming right past. Trees don't just compete for sunlight and water. Underground, their roots connect through vast thread-like networks of fungi called mycorrhizae, sometimes stretching for acres, quietly moving water, nutrients, and even chemical warning signals between trees of different species. Scientists have taken to calling it the Wood Wide Web. A struggling young apple tree sitting near an old established oak isn't necessarily starving. It may be plugged into a lifeline the farmer never accounted for, borrowing resources through fungal threads finer than human hair. Mabel didn't know the term mycorrhizae yet. What she knew was that the dirt near the oaks looked different, darker, looser, threaded through with pale webbing she'd never bothered to notice before that autumn, and that the apple trees closest to that webbing were, without exception, the strongest trees in the orchard. She brought Dot's old bulletins out to the barn and read them by flashlight some evenings, looking for anything about soil life. Most of what she found was outdated or half-relevant, so she started asking Russ questions he wasn't used to hearing from a 10-year-old. "Why do we plow between the rows every spring?" He told her it kept the weeds down. "Does plowing hurt the stuff living in the dirt?" He didn't have an answer. Nobody had ever asked him that. By November, Mabel had a theory, and it terrified her a little, because testing it meant asking her father to do less to the orchard, not more. She wanted him to stop tilling a strip along the tree line, stop spraying that section with the fungicide he used every spring out of habit, and let the leaf litter build up instead of raking it clean. To Russ, this looked like neglect. To Mabel, it looked like leaving the underground network alone long enough to do its work. Russ said no at first. A farmer doesn't just stop managing a field because his daughter has a hunch, however good the hunch sounds. But Dot took Mabel's side, quietly, the way she did most things, and reminded Russ that the 2-acre orchard was headed for the bulldozer anyway. What did it cost to try one season her way first? He gave her 1 row. The first months told them nothing. Winter is patient, and so, apparently, was Mabel. She checked the row every week anyway, brushing back leaf litter to look at the soil underneath, finding more of that pale webbing every time, spreading further than before. Her brother Dean called it the world's most boring science project. Mabel didn't argue, she just kept checking. By the following July, the row she'd left alone told a different story than the rest of the orchard. The leaves were a deeper green, thicker, less curled at the edges from summer heat. The fruit set was heavier. When Russ finally walked the row with his own hands on the branches, he went quiet for a long time, the way he did when something surprised him more than he wanted to admit. He asked her how much fertilizer that row had gotten compared to the rest. She told him none. He asked how much water. Same as always, nothing extra. He stood there working that over in his mind. By September, word had got out, the way it does in small counties. A retired extension agent named Phil Neese, who'd known Dot's late husband, came out to see it for himself. He walked the road twice, crouched down more than once to look at the soil, and told the Kirsches he hadn't seen a fungal network that healthy on a working orchard in 20 years of fieldwork. He asked if a soil scientist from Ohio State could come take samples in the spring. A reporter from the county paper drove out not long after that, and the story ran with a headline calling Mabel a backyard scientist. Mabel thought that was a strange thing to be called for something she'd mostly just noticed. By the time the Mabers came to see the orchard for themselves, they came expecting a polite look at a little girl's science fair project. What they found instead was one strip of trees standing visibly apart from the rest of the field, fuller, darker, heavier with fruit, while the untouched rows around it looked the way they'd always had. One old farmer who'd known Russ's grandfather knelt down at the tree line, dug his fingers into the soil, and pulled up a thin white thread between 2 fingers, turning it over like he'd never really looked at dirt before. "What in the world is this?" he said, not really asking anyone in particular. Mabel told him. She told them all. About the oaks at the fence line, about the network running underground for who knows how far, and about deciding to stop interrupting something that had been working long before anyone thought to plow it under. The laughing had stopped somewhere around July. In its place was something slower to arrive, but it stayed. The Japanese farmer Masabuno Fukuoka once wrote that the goal of farming isn't the crop itself, but the shaping of the person doing the growing. Mabel Kirsch grew healthier apples that year than her family had seen in over a decade, but that wasn't really the discovery. The discovery was a 10-year-old girl who noticed something everyone else had walked past for 60 years, who was willing to leave a field alone instead of fixing it, and who trusted a question longer than most adults trust an answer. Mabel is 11 now. She's already talked her father into giving her a 2nd row for next season. Dot still reads her old bulletins on the porch, though these days Mabel reads right alongside her. And underneath that tired little orchard in Preble County, something has been quietly talking the whole time. It just took a kid willing to listen. What's a secret you think is hiding in plain sight in your own life? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. Let us know where in the world you're watching from, and if stories like this one stay with you, subscribe. We'll see you next week.